All right, welcome back to another episode of the Enriched Wealth Podcast with myself, Chris Tatt. And today we are going to talk about a topic that's been a bit of a hot button topic for the last little while with everyone, and that is cost of living. And I know it's been in the news and it's talked about, and everyone feels it in different ways. So today we want to talk a little bit about the cost of living, understanding the numbers, some strategies around how you can combat cost of living, but also to hopefully coming at it from a bit of a different perspective than we have in the past, thinking through, well, what does it actually mean for each of us individually? Because it is different for everyone and it will impact everyone in different ways. So we really want to make sure that everyone's got the tools they need to approach it in the right way and not just think about it as oh no, the price is going up, what do I do? And giving you back some control and feeling like you're not losing control. And a lot of times with these kind of situations, it can feel like you've got no agency and it's out of your control where you do have some control. And so we want to talk through some of those things today, some of those strategies, and hopefully some of those reminders as well too, on just maybe different ways to approach things and think about things that may not be the norm or the things that you've thought about before in the past, but hopefully, and it doesn't mean you have to follow them. I'm not telling anyone this is the way you have to do it, but hopefully just giving you a bit of a different perspective and a refreshing perspective on it. So the first thing is we want to talk about how we got here. So we talk about cost of living, we talk about prices going up, and a lot of it comes back to inflation. And inflation sounds like this big dirty word, and it's used as a bit of either a political tool or an election thing to say we're going to deal with inflation or inflation's rising or different things like that. Inflation is a part of life. If you look back over the last 100 years of us using money and really being able to track it, over time, inflation is what means that the bottle of milk that costs 10 cents however long ago, it now costs, I think it's $3, and things like that. So it's about the fact that prices go up, but also too our income goes up. But what we want to be thinking about is a cost of living crisis, as they're calling it, is when all of those things go up at the same time, which can be really daunting and quite a contrast to maybe where we were during the pandemic, where interest rates were low and things were different. And so what we've got to remember is everything goes through a cycle. So if we go back to the 1970s, we had really high inflation back in the 1970s. We also had really high interest rates. And the idea behind those high interest rates is that people who have a mortgage will have to put more into that mortgage or into their credit card or into their car loan, and they'll have less to spend on other things. And what that does is it slows down the economy. So people then aren't buying as much discretionary things, or seeing it as, I've got spare cash, I can spend more on this, or I can buy this for more, and things like that. So when it's an inflationary time, what we're seeing is that prices go up, and as prices go up, they impact other things. So if petrol goes up, well, then it costs more to deliver groceries to the grocery store. So then groceries go up and things like that. So there's a bit of a spiral that can go on, and that's what we've seen coming out of the pandemic. And I think part of it is we saw there was a really compressed period where prices didn't change, and a lot of that was an understanding that we're all locked at home, people are doing it tough. But as we came out of that, as we had things like we couldn't get cars delivered, so used car prices went up. Everyone knows the scenarios there. So what that does is it puts pressure on inflation, and what those interest rates do is try and bring down that inflation. But it does create a cost of living issue. And so what we've got to remember is everything goes through cycles, though, and nothing is forever. So just like we don't have low interest rates forever, we don't have high interest rates forever either, and we don't have high inflation forever. It just feels like it at times when you're in the midst of it, and you can get stuck with it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how we've got here, but now we want to talk a little bit about, well, what can we do around cost of living? And what I wanted to start with was actually really thinking through living and what does it mean to live? And you might be thinking, well, we've got these cost pressures and things like that, and everyone's feeling that. Don't worry, I assure you, I'm in that same boat. But also, too, I want us to think a little bit differently about how we can approach some of those costs, or how we can really think about how we want to live. And I think a lot of times we get carried along with what society expects of us, or we get carried along with doing things a certain way, and we don't really actually think about, well, what do I want? What do I actually want out of life? And is the choices I'm making actually taking me closer to what I want? And so I'm going to use a couple of examples through here. I've actually got a little quote I'm going to read first from Simon Sinek in Start With Why, and he says, "For values or guiding principles to be truly effective, they have to be verbs. It's not integrity, it's always do the right thing. It's not innovation, it's look at the problem from a different angle. Articulating our values as verbs gives us a clear idea that we have a clear idea of how to act in any situation." And I think one of the big things for people is to actually define their values. So actually really think about, what is it that I value? What is it that I care about? And that could be a lot of different things, but putting it in context of a doing word. So if I value my health, what does it actually mean as a verb? Does it mean that I eat healthy? Does it mean that I exercise twice a week? Write down those actual things that you want to do, those verbs, those doing words that define your values and the things that you really want out of life. And I think sometimes we don't actually take time to sit and think about that. Life is so busy, and I get it. We've got young kids, and the time you actually get to yourself is quite small. You're always thinking about what other people want, or making sure you're dealing with other people's needs and wants in life. And sometimes we don't actually stop to think about our own. But I think it's really important to actually sit and take stock on a regular basis. And when I say regular, it's not every week. It may be maybe once a year, twice a year. But actually sit down and say, what do we want out of life? And are the things we're doing taking us closer to that? So an example of thinking a little bit differently about life is, I was talking to a couple the other day, and they were thinking about, do they need two cars? They've got two cars. Do they actually need two cars? And so we talked a little bit about the idea that, you know, as a Western society, we've got to this normal of everyone owns their own car. But we don't always think about the cost of owning a car, and we just think that's part of life. And so we talked about, well, what would it look like if you had one car? And they said, well, you know, we can still get to work, because they actually work quite close to each other. So it wasn't going to impact that normal travel routine each day. If they were in different directions, it might be a different conversation, but they were near each other in terms of where they work. And then too, we were talking about, well, what would you use that second car for outside of those normal times? And for them, to be honest, it was we might use it once a week that we're in different places. And so I said to them, well, let's look at the costs. Let's, you know, to have that second car, you've got the insurance, you've got the rego, you've got servicing, you've got putting petrol in it to actually drive to where you need to be. You've got the other consumables like tyres and things like that all add up to the ownership of that car. And I said to them, if you spent $1,000 on Uber over the next 12 months instead of having a second car, would you feel like that was a lot of money? Oh, yeah, it probably feels like we've wasted it. And it's like, but you're happy to spend $2,000 or $3,000 to have that second car sit in the driveway. And at the end of the day, it's not actually giving you any different scenario. You're still getting from A to B. And so sometimes we don't always think about the overall cost. And I'm going to get into it when we talk about expenses, but it's really understanding the numbers and the impacts of what we do to our daily lives. And sometimes we just keep hurtling down the road, not really actually thinking why we're doing some of the decisions we're doing, or thinking that it's a necessity, and sometimes it's actually not. We've got such a great life here in Australia, and we've got so many different options that sometimes we don't always stop to think about what those options could look like. And even just trialing them for a while. Hey, look, that couple might go back to one car, and for 2 or 3 years it works, and then they do need a second car, but they could have saved money over that time as well too by not having that second car and actually thinking a bit differently. And hey, it might actually force them to be in the same car every once in a while and talk a bit more as well too. So there's all these other things that we don't always think about when we think that's what we have to do. So that's the first thing I want us to think about is those values. So if I want you to take a pen and paper and write down, what are the things you really want out of life, and are you moving closer to them or further away from them? And I think a lot of times we don't really think about what we want, how we want it, and what we actually really want from life. Is that really what we need? Is that really what we want? And so another scenario is an upgrade to a house, upgrading your house. And I, everyone has to change houses at different times. I get that. And if you love having your house, that's great. But some people just feel that because they've earned more, I can go and upgrade the house. I can get a bigger house, or I can get some extra rooms. Go to a new house and get extra rooms. But they don't always think about, well, what's the impact on, now I've got extra spaces to clean, I've got higher rates, I've got higher insurance, the mortgage repayments have increased, and now I'm working longer, but I'm not actually enjoying that thing that I set out to get, because it's actually caused more angst, more stress, rather than actually being more fulfilling and actually giving me what I thought I wanted. And so it's going to be different for everyone, but you've really got to think about that first. What do you want? And I know sometimes that can be hard, or sometimes it's hard to get that clarity, especially when you do have competing interests. If you've got kids, if you've got a spouse who might look at things differently, they all need to be taken into account. But you've really got to sit down and be clear on those things that you want. And I'll talk about how that then impacts your expenses as well too. Just one more scenario, I'm thinking a little bit differently. I've got a friend who has had a smartphone for years, and in 7 months ago, I think it was, he got rid of his smartphone. And he went and got I'll call it a dumb phone. It can send text messages, it can make calls, and that's about all it can do. And the reason he did that was he realized that he wanted more time in his life. And one of the big things that was taking time away from his life was using his smartphone. He'd get caught on social media, or he would watch videos, or whatever it was. I'm sure most of you have a smartphone, and you've probably spent more time than you have doing things that you may not actually really enjoy. And so he said to himself, what are the things that I really love? I actually want to read more. And what's stopping me from reading? It's actually owning a smartphone. And so he's sort of removed himself now from having a smartphone, and he's like reads, I think, a book a week or a fortnight, and he's getting other things done that he's really wanted to do. He's tried his hand at drawing as well too. But there was all these things that he wanted to try and experience, but he could see that because of his decisions, he wasn't able to do that. And consequently enough, he's actually in a better financial position because he's not spending as much money on a phone each month either. And he thought he needed it, but he just didn't. And he's found little workarounds for this and that. If he needs to get a map up or something like that, it's there. But the convenience sometimes is less than the actual cost of having that. And so often we don't always count the time as well too that we lose on some of these items. We only look at the dollar cost. And I really want us to think about the time cost as well, because so often we are more than happy to waste hours upon hours to save a couple of dollars, rather than really thinking about what's this costing me in time. And we can't get time back. You can make more money, you can do other things around money, but you can't do things around time. We've all got 24 hours in the day, and sometimes it's how we spend that's the most valuable. So we just really need to be thinking about that. So if you've got your values, you've defined your values, then we can talk about, well, what does it cost to actually get those, to work towards those values? So eating healthy and things like that, what does that do? Impact your grocery bill? Where you want to live, does that impact your cost as well too? Is where you want to live more important than, say, your health? Is it actually better to have a smaller place that's closer to somewhere where you need to be? And this is where we need to start thinking about the cost of our decisions, or the costs of what we're actually getting into as well too. I'll use another example. A couple I was talking to a little while back were talking about the difference between renting and owning a house. And look, everyone has their own ideas around that, but a lot of times, and I've heard this time and time again, rent is dead money. Rent is not dead money. Rent is living, and there's a cost to living, whether you own a home or not. And so sometimes people don't always think about that, I've got to get a house as soon as possible, and this is what they were struggling with. They were renting, friends of theirs had brought, and they were sort of feeling like, am I falling behind? But we started looking at the numbers. It was like, well, how much are you actually spending on rent? And they weren't spending heaps on rent. It was actually, they'd found a good place. It was close to where they needed to be. And for them, this was this worked really well for them at this point in time in their life. It might change down the track, but for now this was fine. But they felt like they were wasting money because they were renting. And so I said, well, let's run some numbers. If we were to buy, how much interest would you pay to the bank? And they never really thought about that. But it's when you buy and you've got a debt, you've got to obviously pay interest. Well, that interest goes to the bank. And so that interest is similar to what you'd pay in rent, or if it's more than you'd pay in rent, and it's actually forcing you to work longer or take on a more stressful job and things like that. Is that actually worth it? Are you actually getting what you need out of it? So we talked about the fact that because they were spending less on rent that they would have been making in repayments, they're actually able to save, and so they're actually putting money aside. So now they've got a little nest egg over here that's actually there and gives them some flexibility. So now they don't have as much concern if one of them has to stop work for sickness or things like that. They've got something to fall on, where if they had a mortgage and they were living week to week and someone got sick, well, what's going to happen? How are they going to combat that? So for them, it gave them this flexibility. And so we talked through, well, let's think about the costs of home ownership as opposed to renting. And you've got mortgage repayments, you've got rates, you've got insurance, and all of these things. And sometimes in life, that may not actually be the best thing for you. Other times, having that certainty of ownership is really important as well too. So I'm not discounting that, but this idea that this is what everyone has to do, or this is what I have to do, I think sometimes limits our options, limits our way of how we can look at what we do and how we do it. So when we're thinking about our expenses, I really want us to be thinking through that. Is this actually what I need? Do I need the top tier of Netflix and 4 screens for everyone? Or is that just creating everyone to go off and watch Netflix in their own room rather than us maybe watching TV as a family, or not watching TV at all? And so I use that as a small example, but there are lots of examples like that out there where you've really got to come back to looking at it, saying where am I actually spending the money on? And we'll include a link to a little spreadsheet that we've got that you can actually start putting in your costs. So you can actually go, well, this is how much I spend on this per week, or this is how much I spend per month on this. And I think it's really good to actually get to know the numbers, not live in them every day. I think that actually, I say this coming from a finance background, that I enjoy the numbers, but I know not everyone does, and some people feel like it's death by numbers. But I think knowing some numbers is actually really helpful. So I think going through that process of setting that budget and saying, well, what are our expenses and where do they lie? And it's the same whether it's your personally or for the business as well. So actually going through and saying, what are we spending on, and is it actually giving us the value we need? An example I'll use is people look at like rising energy costs, and some people are going to put solar on. Well, solar can offset that cost as well. So I'm not saying you have to go out and put solar on, but some people don't look at solar as an investment or as a cost reduction measure down the track. They just see it as, well, that's a cost. It might be nice, but there's other people I know that would go out and get a tax return of, a tax refund of $1,500, $2,000, and not even think twice about what they spend it on. It's like free money. But actually saying, well, how can I redeploy that money to reduce other costs? What can I do to make life easier? How can I re-spend that so I get a return on my money? And I think you've got to come from that aspect of, if you're spending money, what are you actually getting for it? And a lot of times we don't always look at the return on what we're spending on. And I sound like an accountant saying that, but there is a real element to that sometimes we spend without thinking, or spend on areas that aren't actually giving us the value or meeting our values at the end of the day. And that's what's really important, is actually what do you value and is it spending? So go through your expenses, have a look at them, go through them with a fine-tooth comb, and really start to say, do I need that, or do I want that? Is that actually life-giving, or is it actually a little bit life-taking as well too? Is it actually costing me not only money but time as well? And so be really intentional about that. The other thing is, when you get to some of these expenses, don't always think of things as a fixed cost. So we look at energy and say it's a fixed cost. Yes, it's a fixed cost, but it's also a fixed cost if you never go and talk to your energy provider about a lower rate or a better deal, or find another energy provider. And I look, there's the rare scenarios where someone will call up and say, hey, I think I've got a better deal for you here, or I think I've got a better interest rate for you on your mortgage. But most times, they're not going to do that, and that's known as the lazy tax, so to speak. And it's there for people who don't go out and actively look for a better deal. If you stay in the same thing, it will cost more over time. You've got to be actively involved, and I think sometimes people don't realise that being a little bit actively involved could save them 2 or 3 grand. And it may seem like, oh, that's a bit of hard work, got to make a few phone calls. But if you could sit down for 3 hours and find savings of 2 or 3 grand, you're basically making $1,000 an hour for that effort and that work. But people don't always see it that way. But there's some of the things that you need to be active in, and you can only be active if you know the numbers. And that's why I'm going to keep saying that, know the numbers, because so many people I talk to don't always know the numbers, or don't always know what a better deal is, or take the time to actually look for a better deal. It is really about saying we've got to get back to knowing the numbers when it comes to expenses, and where we're spending it on, and is it giving us value. So that is one of the big things when it comes to cost of living and expenses. So hopefully that gives you a bit better thought process around writing your values, writing down your expenses and thinking them in terms of your values, and making sure that they're actually meeting your values. And look, not every expense will always meet your values. And unfortunately, there are things that we do need to, we may need to spend money on. So if it's, don't go and cancel your private health insurance because you're healthy, you still might need that if something goes wrong down the track. So not every expense you just want to go and cut straight away, but there are plenty of little things that we can think about, or ways that we can approach differently what we do, and then that gives us a bit of a different perspective. And I think that when we're talking cost of living, what is it to live for me? What does it mean to live for me? What do I really value and is important to me? That's part of that. So that's one aspect of cost of living, is the expenses, but the other side is income. So it's really thinking about, well, how do I create more income? And this is very much a personal thing for each individual, and some of it comes back to skill level, the job role you're in, the responsibilities you're taking on. If you're a business owner, it's thinking about, well, what are the different ways I can actually generate income as well too? So is that more sales? Is that building a better value product? Is that servicing clients better? Is it looking for efficiencies on delivering those products? So there are lots of ways that we can generate income in a better way. And so I'm going to work through just a few little strategies around income and how to look at income. But also too, what we want to do is get clear on our expenses first, because that can also drive some of our income. And if we're clear on our expenses, what we want to be able to do is say, well, if we've got these expenses, we want to be saving about 10%. We need at least this much income. And sometimes we start with the income first and say, well, what can we afford? And I think that's a bit of a fallacy scenario around thinking, well, if I think about what I can afford, as income goes up, then I'll think about what can I afford as income goes up. And a lot of times, and we see that, I see this regularly, is as income goes up, and I'm guilty of it as much as the next person sometimes, is that spending goes up as well. We don't always think about, well, what's the opportunity in terms of that increase, not to spend more or to upgrade or to get this, but how does it give us more flexibility or more savings or more ways that we can restructure our finances? Or does it, it's just thinking about it differently and saying, well, if I've got more money, do I add more expenses, or do I look at how this gives me an opportunity to get ahead, to change my outcome, where I could be in a couple of years' time? So when we're thinking about income, I want it to be separate from expenses, because I think when we look at it, income first and then expenses, we will always spend what we earn. But if we start with expenses first and then say, well, I need at least this much, and then if I've got more, that can pay down debt, or it can go towards savings, or it can go towards investing. It's a different way of looking at it, and it's just, some of this is around perspective. I'm not saying it's going to fix everything, but our perspective and our attitude towards money is very important in terms of when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to spending, when it comes to making future decisions as well too. So that's what I want you to think about there in terms of income strategies. So one of the things is, when you're looking at, well, if I'm working, how can I increase my income? And that could come down to taking on more responsibility, taking on a greater role within the organisation you're in. It may be switching jobs, but I wouldn't rush out to switch jobs. I would have a conversation with whoever you're employed with as well too. If you like where you're working, sometimes the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and you don't always know what extra work or stress you might get from switching jobs, or it might be the reverse as well too. So one is, it's looking at your options around your employment and saying, well, where can I go? What can I do? The other thing is saying, well, with my skills, can I upskill? Can I change jobs? Can I get 2 part-time jobs rather than 1 full-time job, and does that give me more flexibility as well too? So it's really thinking around what you want from that job, and are you willing to take on, do you want to take on more responsibility and more work, or do you actually want to simplify the expenses so you don't have to worry about that? And that might be another way of looking at it. From a business side, I mean, it's really thinking through, well, is this the only revenue stream I've got? If it's the only revenue stream, if there's only one product you sell, can you add another product? So can you add another revenue stream? Can you go up or down the supply chain as well too? So sometimes it might be that you've got the product, but can you also deliver the product? And so all of a sudden you're now the delivery person as well too, which opens up a new revenue stream. Or it could be back up the manufacturing line. Can you do something else with the product prior to you getting it and delivering it to the customer that adds to the value chain, but also adds to your revenue stream because you're not paying someone else to do it. So it's really that's one of the ways to do it. The other way is just to obviously get more clients, get more customers, so sell more. And there's different strategies around that. It could be more marketing. It could be going into new geographic locations. It could be thinking about where your business comes from, and if you can get it from another source, or whether you can focus more on that source where you get your business from. So there are many opportunities around that to think differently, or think of different ways that you can get income in. But that won't happen unless you actually take action towards it as well too. There's no, unfortunately, there's no just quick fix to some of these things. It's actually taking that active role in it. So if I go back to being an employee, it's taking an active role to go and upskill yourself. And it may not be provided. It may be provided by your employer. It's always worth asking, but also to saying, well, if I want to change jobs, if I want to do this, I need to actually take an active role in it as well too. If I sit back, no one's necessarily going to come and offer it to me. And so it's really taking those proactive steps around either generating more income or generating different sources of income as well too. So that's some of the things to think about. So look, we've talked a lot today, but look, the take-home message is start with what you value, and let that then drive your other choices. Don't let the rising costs of expenses be this thing that means you have to go out and work harder, work longer, work more. Let the life you want then dictate the income you need to get there, and be really honest with yourself about what you want, because everyone probably has this idea of, oh, it's this or it's that. Where ask yourself that, is that something that's coming from external, or is it you that really wants that? And a lot of times it can be external factors that are sending us down a road, rather than actually internally, this is really what I want, and I'm really proud to make that decision and make that choice and to do that thing. So hopefully that's given you something to think about. So start with your values, think about the costs and the real costs around it. Do the actual numbers. And I know that seems like hard work sometimes, but doing the numbers, and especially if you're not a numbers person, but do the numbers and really understand what it's costing you to make some of these decisions or have some of these things in your life. And then finally, thinking through the income around supporting that expense and supporting that lifestyle. So hopefully that's given you some tools and some things to think about. As always, ask questions, go seek professional help if you need as well too. Go chew someone's ear off if that helps as well. But I would say we've got professionals, we've got different ways of looking at things and different perspectives and tools to help you run the numbers. But it really is understanding what you want and how to get that. I hope that helps. I hope you're able to think a little bit differently about the cost of living crisis, and hopefully don't lose yourself in all of the media noise as well too. But really talk about what it means for you as an individual. All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you.